Mary and the Wickling Family Secret.
A tale of discovery, friendship, and the quiet power of hidden things. The Wickling Family Secret invites readers to listen closely, because some houses remember.
This is The Wickling Family Secrets, written by Barrel Coops.
Chapter 1. The Music Box in the Attic. The attic was quiet, except for the soft creak of floorboards and the occasional flutter of dust in the sunlight. Mary Pomfret stood on tiptoe, reaching into the back of an old trunk. Her fingers brushed something smooth and wooden. She pulled it out carefully. It was a music box. The lid was carved with tiny flowers and a faded crust, one she didn't recognize. A winding key stuck out from the side, and when she turned it, the box played a soft, tinkling tune. But it wasn't the music that caught her attention. It was what lay inside. Nestled beneath the velvet lining was a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. Mary unfolded it slowly. The paper crackled. On it was a map, drawn in delicate ink, with winding lines and tiny symbols. Some looked like rooms. Others looked like tunnels. And in the corner, written in the smallest handwriting she'd ever seen, were words she couldn't read. She ran to the Wicklings' new attic home, heart pounding. Poppy was the first to greet her. "What's that?" "A map," Mary whispered. "I think it's Wickling writing." Beatrix took the parchment and studied it. "It's old. Very old. This symbol here," she pointed to a spiral, "means hidden. And this one means home." Stanley leaned over her shoulder. "That's the East Wing. I'm sure of it." "The East Wing?" Mary asked. "But it's been closed for decades." "Exactly," Sydney said, stepping forward. "Which means no one's disturbed it. If this map is real, it could lead to something important." "Something forgotten," Beatrix added softly. Mary looked at the map again. The lines twisted and turned, leading from the attic down through the house, floor by floor, until they vanished into a dark corner marked only with a single word. She couldn't read it, but she felt it. Adventure. Chapter 2. The East Wing Awakens. The East Wing of Pomfret House had been silent for years. Once it had been filled with guests, music, and candlelight. Now it was a place of shadows and dust, its doors locked and its windows shuttered. Mary had only ever seen it from the outside until now. She stood with Sydney, Beatrix, and the children at the edge of a narrow hallway, the map clutched in her hand. "This is it," she whispered. "The map shows a passage starting here." The wallpaper was peeling, and the air smelled of old wood and forgotten things. Stanley tapped along the wall with a thimble-sized hammer. "Here," he said. Mary ran her fingers along the panel and found a small notch. She pressed it, and with a soft click, a section of the wall swung inward. Behind it was a narrow tunnel, just tall enough for a Wickling and just wide enough for Mary to crawl through on her hands and knees. They lit a candle and stepped inside. The tunnel sloped gently downward, the walls lined with old bricks and cobwebs. After a few minutes, it opened into a small chamber. Mary gasped. The room was filled with tiny furniture, tables made from spools, chairs carved from cork, and shelves lined with thimble cups and matchbox books. Everything was covered in dust, but it was clear this had once been a Wickling home. Poppy ran her hand over a faded cushion. "They lived here." Beatrix nodded slowly. "Long before us." On the far wall, a faded mural showed a group of Wicklings standing in front of a large house, Pomfret House. One figure held a scroll. Another pointed to the sky. Mary stepped closer. "This is a clue." Sydney examined the mural. "It's a story. A journey. Look, this symbol here matches the one on the map." Mary's heart raced. Then this is just the beginning. They had found the first breadcrumb. And the East Wing was waking up. Chapter 3. The Passage Behind the Panel. The next morning, Mary returned to the East Wing with the map tucked safely in her apron. The Wicklings were already waiting, gathered near the faded mural they'd found the day before. Stanley was tapping the wall again, this time with a small metal spoon. "There's something behind here," he said. "It sounds hollow." Mary ran her fingers along the paneling. The wallpaper was peeling, and the wood beneath was cracked with age. She pressed gently and felt it shift. With a soft click, a narrow panel swung open. Behind it was a dark passage, just wide enough for Mary to squeeze through sideways. The Wicklings slipped in easily, their lanterns casting flickering shadows on the walls. The air was cool and smelled of stone and dust. The tunnel sloped downward, winding behind the walls like a forgotten river. Cobwebs brushed Mary's cheeks, and the floor creaked beneath her feet. "This must have been built a long time ago," Sydney murmured. "Before even my grandfather's time." They followed the passage until it opened into a small chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, tiny ones, Wickling-sized, filled with old tools, scraps of fabric, and a few faded books. Poppy picked up a tiny wooden box. Inside were buttons, beads, and a folded piece of parchment. "It's a letter," she whispered. Beatrix took it and squinted at the faded ink. "It's in old Wickling script. I can only read part of it." She read aloud slowly. "Left Hollow Hearth, flames behind us. Pomfret House, safe for now." Mary's eyes widened. Hollow Hearth? That was in the journal too. Sydney nodded. It must be where the Wicklings came from. Their home before this one. They were quiet for a moment, the weight of the discovery settling around them like dust. Then Stanley pointed to the far wall. "There's another tunnel." It was smaller, steeper, and darker, but it was marked on the map. Mary lit her lantern. "Let's see where it goes." And with that, they stepped into the shadows once more, following the trail of their ancestors. Chapter 4. Letters in the Wall. The tunnel grew narrower as they followed it deeper into the east wing. Dust clung to their clothes, and the air smelled of stone and time. Mary held the lantern high, casting long shadows on the brick walls. They reached a bend where the tunnel widened into a small alcove. The walls here were different, lined with wooden panels instead of stone. Stanley tapped one. "Hollow." Mary pressed her fingers along the edge and felt a slight give. With a gentle tug, the panel creaked open, revealing a hidden cavity. Inside were bundles of tiny letters, tied with faded ribbon. Beatrix reached in carefully and lifted one out. The paper was brittle, the ink faded to brown. She unfolded it slowly. "It's Wickling script," she whispered. "Very old." She read aloud, translating as she went. "We left Hollow Hearth under smoke and sorrow. The fire took our home, but not our hope. Pomfret House is vast. We will hide. We will rebuild." Mary's eyes widened. "They came here after a fire?" Sydney nodded. "Hollow Hearth must have been their village. This confirms it." Poppy pulled out another letter. This one mentions a name, Elder Thimblewick. Beatrix's eyes lit up. "He was one of the first Wicklings to settle here. My grandmother told stories about him." They read more letters, piecing together fragments of a journey, a storm at sea, a hidden entrance beneath a tree, a warning about the watchers above. Mary frowned. "Watchers?" Beatrix looked uneasy. "Some Wicklings believed the big folk were always watching. That's why they built the tunnels, to stay hidden." Mary glanced at the map again. "There's another tunnel just ahead. It leads down." Sydney nodded. "Then we follow it." They packed the letters carefully and moved on, the mystery deepening with every step. Somewhere in the house, the truth waited. And they were getting closer. Chapter 5. Sebastian's Secret. Mary crept down the East Wing corridor, the map tucked under her arm and her thoughts full of Wickling letters and hidden tunnels. She was halfway to the secret panel when a voice made her jump. "Where are you going?" She spun around. Sebastian stood at the end of the hallway, arms folded, one eyebrow raised. Mary's heart sank. Nowhere. Sebastian, who had once insisted everyone call him Pomfret and refused to answer to his full name, tilted his head. "You're sneaking. You only sneak when something interesting is happening." Mary hesitated. "You can't tell anyone." "That depends," he said, stepping closer. "Is it dangerous?" "No," she said quickly. "Well, maybe a little. But not for you." He sighed.
Fine.
"I won't tell. But only if you stop calling me Sebastian." Mary blinked. But that's your name. I hate it, he muttered. It sounds like a sneeze. Just call me Pomfret. Mary grinned. All right, Pomfret. He smirked. Now, what are we sneaking into? She hesitated, then pulled out the map. We found this. It shows secret tunnels. Wickling tunnels. Pomfret raised an eyebrow. Wicklings? You mean the tiny people you were always going on about? They're real, Mary said. And they're my friends. Pomfret studied the map. This is incredible. Where does it lead? We think it goes all the way to the cellar. But we're still following it. He handed the map back. Well, I'm not crawling through any tunnels. But I can keep watch. If Julian or Mother comes this way, I'll distract them. Mary blinked. You do that. He shrugged. It's more interesting than reading about trade routes. Mary smiled. Thank you. Pomfret turned to go, then paused. Just don't get caught. Or eaten by rats. Mary laughed. I'll try. As he disappeared down the corridor, Mary slipped through the panel and into the tunnel, her heart lighter. She had an unexpected ally. And the next part of the map was waiting. Chapter 6. The Room Beneath the Floor. The tunnel narrowed again, sloping downward until it ended at a wooden wall. Mary pressed her ear against it. Nothing. Just silence. Stanley tapped the boards. There's space behind it. Mary ran her fingers along the edges and found a small latch, nearly invisible beneath the dust. She gave it a gentle tug. Click. The wall swung open, revealing a small, square room beneath the floorboards of the east wing. It was dark and musty, but the air felt different, like it hadn't been touched in a very long time. Mary stepped inside, holding the lantern high. The room was filled with tiny furniture, all carefully arranged, a table made from a cigar box, chairs carved from cork, and shelves lined with miniature books. Everything was Wickling-sized. This was a meeting room, Sydney said softly. A place for gathering. Beatrix brushed dust from a carved wooden plaque on the wall. Look at this. It was a family crest, 2 acorns crossed over a curled leaf, with a ribbon beneath that read, From Hollow Hearth, we endure. Mary's eyes widened. That's their motto. Poppy opened a drawer in the tiny desk and pulled out a rolled parchment. It was a family tree, hand-drawn in delicate ink, with names written in Wickling script. It's incomplete, Beatrix said, scanning it. It ends with Elder Thimblewick. No mention of who came after. But it's a start, Sydney said. Proof that we've been here for generations. Mary looked around the room. Why would they hide this? Maybe they were afraid, Beatrix said. Or maybe they wanted it to be found only when the time was right. Stanley pointed to a small symbol in the corner of the tree. That's the same mark from the map. Mary leaned closer. Then there's more. This isn't the end. They carefully rolled the family tree and packed it away. As they left the room, Mary glanced back at the crest on the wall. The Wicklings had a history. And they were finally beginning to uncover it. Chapter 7. The Ledger in the Library. The library at Pomfret House was grand and silent, with shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling and a ladder that rolled along the rails with a satisfying click. Mary had always loved it, but today, she wasn't here for books. She was here for answers. The Wicklings had told her that some of the tunnels didn't match the usual Wickling design. They were too wide, too carefully built. Sydney suspected someone else had helped construct them, someone from the Pomfret family. Mary scanned the shelves until she found a dusty leather-bound ledger tucked behind a row of forgotten volumes. It was heavy and smelled of ink and age. She opened it carefully. Inside were pages of notes, sketches, and lists, records of the house's construction. One entry caught her eye. East Wing renovations completed. Additional passages installed as requested by Lord Alaric Pomfret. Unusual specifications, narrow viewing slits, concealed doors, and private access routes. Purpose not disclosed. Mary's eyes widened. He built the tunnels, to spy? She flipped through more pages. There were mentions of observation points, listening vents, and even a concealed cellar chamber for private storage. She closed the book, heart racing. Lord Alaric Pomfret, an ancestor she'd never heard of, had filled the house with secrets, and the Wicklings had unknowingly made their home inside them. She tucked the ledger under her arm and hurried back to the attic. Beatrix read the entry aloud to the others. So the tunnels weren't just for hiding. They were for watching. Watching who? Stanley asked. Everyone, Sydney said. Servants. Guests. Maybe even family. Mary looked at the map again. There's one more tunnel we haven't followed. It leads to the cellar. Beatrix nodded. Then that's where we go next. The Wicklings packed their satchels. Mary grabbed her lantern. The house was beginning to speak. And they were finally learning how to listen. Chapter 8. The Cellar Door. The cellar of Pomfret House was colder than Mary remembered. She held her lantern high as she stepped carefully down the stone steps, the Wicklings close behind her. The air was damp and smelled faintly of earth and old wine. Shadows clung to the corners, and the flickering light made the bottles on the shelves glint like watchful eyes. This way, Mary whispered, consulting the map. Behind the wine crates. Stanley and Sydney scrambled ahead, weaving between dusty barrels and cobwebbed shelves. They reached the far wall, where a stack of wooden crates leaned precariously. There's something behind here, Stanley called. Mary helped them shift the crates aside. Behind them was a section of wall that didn't quite match the rest, smoother, newer, and with a faint outline of a door. Beatrix stepped forward, brushing away dust. There's a symbol here. The same spiral from the map. Mary ran her fingers along the edge. There must be a latch. Click. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passage that led into darkness. The air that drifted out was colder still, tinged with something ancient. They stepped inside. The room beyond was small and circular, with stone walls and a domed ceiling. In the center stood a Wickling-sized table, carved from dark wood and covered in dust. Around it were tiny chairs, long abandoned. On the table lay a single object, a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked with age. Beatrix approached it reverently. This belonged to someone important. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with neat, looping script, Wickling handwriting, old but legible. It's a journal, she whispered. The first Wickling to live in Pomfret House. Mary leaned over her shoulder. The first page read, "We arrived under moonlight, hidden in the folds of the earth. The Pomfret man kept his word. He gave us shelter, and in return, we gave him silence." Sydney's eyes widened. They made a deal. Beatrix nodded. The tunnels were built together. Wickling hands and Pomfret tools. They turned the pages slowly, reading entries about the early days of hiding, of rebuilding, of watching the big folk from behind the walls. There were sketches of the house, notes about secret doors, and warnings about those who ask too many questions. Then, near the end, a curious entry. The map is complete. The path is sealed. The truth lies beneath the Hollow Hearth. Mary looked up. Hollow Hearth again. Beatrix's voice was hushed. It's more than a place. It's part of their story. Their beginning. Mary traced the spiral symbol on the map. And maybe their secret. They packed the journal carefully, wrapping it in cloth. As they turned to leave, Mary glanced back at the little table, imagining the Wicklings who once sat there, planning, hoping, hiding. The cellar door had opened. And with it, the past had begun to speak. Chapter 9. The Hollow Hearth. The journal had mentioned it more than once, Hollow Hearth, but now, with the cellar door behind them and the journal in their hands, the name felt heavier. Older. Like a secret that had waited too long to be told. Mary sat cross-legged in the attic, the map spread out before her. The Wicklings gathered around, lanterns casting a warm glow over the parchment. "There," Beatrix said, pointing to a faint symbol near the bottom corner. "That's the same mark from the journal. The spiral with the flame inside." "It's labeled," Mary whispered. "Hollow Hearth." "But it's not a room," Sydney said. "It's beneath everything." Stanley tapped the map thoughtfully. "What if it's not a place in the house? What if it's under the house?" Beatrix's eyes widened. A hidden chamber. Below the cellar. Mary's heart quickened. Then we haven't reached the end of the tunnels yet. They returned to the cellar that evening, lanterns in hand, and retraced their steps to the circular room. The journal had hinted at something sealed, something buried. Mary knelt beside the Wickling-sized table and ran her fingers along the floor. "There's a seam," she said. "A hatch." Sydney and Stanley helped clear the dust. Beneath it was a small iron ring, rusted with age. Mary pulled gently. With a groan, the hatch lifted. A narrow shaft descended into darkness, lined with stone and just wide enough for Mary to squeeze through. Wickling-sized footholds were carved into the wall. "I'll go first," she said. The air grew colder as she climbed down, the lantern swinging from her belt. At the bottom, her feet touched solid ground, and she gasped. The chamber was vast. It stretched out in all directions, the ceiling lost in shadow. Along the walls were carvings, ancient Wickling script, spirals, flames, and trees. In the center stood a stone hearth, long cold, its chimney stretching up into darkness. "This is it," Mary whispered as the Wicklings joined her. Hollow Hearth. Beatrix stepped forward, her voice hushed. This was their sanctuary, their last refuge. They explored slowly, reverently. There were alcoves filled with relics, tiny tools, faded banners, and carved stones bearing names long forgotten. One wall held a mural, brighter than the one in the east wing. It showed Wicklings fleeing a burning village, crossing a stormy sea, and arriving at Pomfret House under moonlight. But in the corner, half hidden in shadow, was something new. A ship. Its sails bore the Pomfret crest. Mary stared. "That's a pirate ship." Beatrix read the inscription beneath it. "He came with fire and gold. He left with silence and secrets." Sydney frowned. "Who did?" Mary turned to the others. "Lord Alaric Pomfret. The one who built the tunnels. The one who made the deal." Beatrix nodded slowly. "He wasn't just helping. He was hiding something." Mary looked back at the ship. And the Wicklings knew. They stood in silence, the truth settling around them like dust. Hollow Hearth wasn't just a place. It was a memory, a warning, and a promise that the past would not stay buried forever. Chapter 10. A Scandal in the Shadows. The next morning, the attic was quiet. Mary sat with the journal open in her lap. The Wicklings gathered close. They had returned from Hollow Hearth with more questions than answers and one final clue. Beatrix turned the last page carefully. "There's something written here. It's faint." She held it to the light. "The treasure is hidden in plain sight. The scandal buried in silence. Let the watchers watch, but never see." Mary frowned. "Treasure." Stanley's eyes lit up. "Real treasure." Sydney shook his head. "Not necessarily gold. It could be knowledge. Or something the Pomfrets didn't want found." Beatrix traced the final lines. "It mentions a scandal. Something involving the Pomfret family." Mary stood and crossed to the map. The journal said Lord Alaric Pomfret helped the Wicklings, but he also built the tunnels to spy. What if he wasn't just watching others? What if he was hiding something of his own? Beatrix finished. They returned to the library, the ledger still tucked behind the shelves. Mary flipped through the pages again, this time looking for anything unusual. "There," she said, pointing. "A shipment. Delivered late at night. No record of contents. Signed by Alaric himself." Beatrix read aloud, "Delivered to the East Wing. Stored beneath the hearthstone. Do not disturb." Mary's eyes widened. The hearthstone. In the drawing room. They crept down to the drawing room, where the grand fireplace stood cold and unused. Mary knelt and ran her fingers along the edge of the hearthstone. "There's a gap," she whispered. With the Wicklings' help, she pried it loose. Beneath was a hollow space, and inside, a small iron box. Mary lifted it out carefully. The lock was rusted, but Stanley produced a tiny pin and picked it with ease. The lid creaked open. Inside were papers, dozens of them. Letters, ledgers, and a worn leather pouch filled with gold coins stamped with a foreign crest. Beatrix read one of the letters aloud. To Lord Alaric Pomfret. Payment received. The goods will be moved by nightfall. No names. No questions. Captain R. Mary's breath caught. Captain R., a pirate? Sydney nodded slowly. Alaric was smuggling, using the tunnels, and he paid the Wicklings to keep quiet. Beatrix looked pale. That's the scandal. The Pomfrets were never accused, but the Wicklings knew. They helped him hide it. Mary closed the box gently, and they left clues, so the truth wouldn't be lost forever. They sat in silence, the weight of history pressing in. The Wicklings had fled fire and found refuge. The Pomfrets had offered shelter, but at a price. And now, generations later, the truth had finally come to light. Mary looked at her friends. We have to protect this. Not just the treasure, but the story. Beatrix nodded. It's part of who we are. Sydney smiled. And, maybe, it's not the end. Mary looked down at the map one last time. There were still symbols they hadn't explored. Still secrets waiting in the shadows. And the house, Pomfret House, wasn't finished speaking yet.
This was The Wickling Family Secrets, written by Beryl Coops.
This was the second in a series of stories about the little folk, the Wicklings, and their helper, a 9-year-old girl called Mary. Each story is complete and incorporates all the same characters. If you enjoyed this story, check out the playlist under Family Audiobooks for more adventures with Mary and the Wicklings.
I hope you enjoyed my short story. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. I have written over 500 short stories over the years under many pen names. I will be updating these and recording them under the Beryl Coops name. I will be listing them on YouTube as fast as we can get them recorded. They will include historical drama, humor, adventure, romance, period drama, mystery, thriller, war stories, spy stories, revenge, horror, psychological horror, dystopian, disaster, children's stories, love stories, and more. Too many to name. Something for everyone. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up. It helps others find my channel. Until next time, thank you for listening to the end.